I think I should get brownie points because for making a presentation just back from the holidays. No. So Happy New Year to everybody. So as Bill said, search, which I don't know how familiar most of you are, so I'm just going to give a brief, this is going to be a brief presentation, but I'm hoping that it'll generate a discussion, because I think both search and I'm going to talk a little bit about GRISO are effectively in the process of starting off, and I think feedback from all of you would be of interest here. So search has been around for several years, but I guess now we're talking about the new search, which also reflects a project that was just funded by NSF, and I am not overly familiar with, I wasn't overly familiar with search in the past, and I've just joined, but the general goal of search is to achieve a scientific understanding of changes that are happening in the Arctic, and help inform how to respond to these changes. And so the new search is really focusing on trying to be a link, both in terms of synthesizing the science, but also two-way communication with non-scientists, in the sense, or scientists outside of the areas of focus of search, so the broader research community, the federal agencies, and stakeholders. And within the search moves in 5-year intervals. The 5-year science goals are focused on 3 themes. One is Arctic sea ice. The second one is permafrost, and the third one, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, is land ice loss and its impact on sea level, but not just sea level. So this is the sort of overarching goal of search, and so the way search is organized is in the next slide. If I figure out how to advance, oh, here we go. Which is something that I was in the search proposal, and it's changed a little bit, but not too much. And so if you look at the sort of in the panel that is highlighted with a red box, dashed red box, there are these 3 action teams. One is on Arctic sea ice, one is on permafrost, and one is on land ice changes. And so the idea of search is that there will be 3 main action teams that are going to essentially coordinate the work and the synthesis and the information dissemination through these 3 action teams, and then this feeds back into the sort of search governance structure, which is a steering committee and an executive director who is presently, I believe, WHOI, and they're in the process of looking for a new director. And then there's a feed back. There's communication with agencies, IRPIC, and so on. And obviously this is just a schematic, and you know, as this presentation shows, we have direct links to IRPIC, for example, and communication. So this is the overarching search structure. Any questions on search before I move into the land ice work?
I guess I do. This is Hetty, and this may not be a fair question for you, Fiamma. And maybe I should also already be more familiar with this, but it seems odd that the only communication from the action teams up would be, oh no, I guess it looked to me like it was only going through the AON coordinator, but there's this broader pink arrow in the background, right?
Yes, and to be honest, I'm not sure that, you know, the AON coordinator is going to serve this function. I think this is, you know, it was sort of a proposed diagram, but I think search
Okay.
is very flexible, and this is why I think it's important to have these communications now. It's in everybody's best interest to make sure that there's direct communication, both with the broader community, with the federal agencies, and so on. So, you know, this. Any other questions?
Well, it's Martin here. If I could make a comment, each of the action teams is going to have co-chairs or a chair, and one can imagine that those individuals, as representatives of each of those action teams, will be in a position to communicate directly with any agency or with IARPIC collaboration teams, and not have to go through the science office and the SSC, for example. This is typical of all wiring diagrams. You can never make one that represents every flow, because if you did, it would be incomprehensible.
Yes, agreed. And in fact, as I'm going to discuss shortly, it also discussed the possibility of having an IARPIC representative on the action team, if this seems like a good idea, and if anybody volunteers. But you know, we can come to that in a minute. So and also Bob Binschlader, who's on the call, is on the search steering committee. So you know, any tough question you should direct to Bob. All right, I'm going to move down. All right. Okay. So the Land Ice Action Team, Ted Scambus and myself are the co-chairs. And you're all familiar with the motivation. We've seen large changes in Greenland, and I should stress that even though Greenland is one of the largest contributors, the focus is not restricted to Greenland alone, but we're talking about Arctic glaciers and ice caps. And the reason to the interest here, one of them is global sea level rise, but there are other things we should be worried about. Regional changes, there's been enhanced surface melt in Greenland. This is having a large impact on some of the local infrastructure. There's increased freshwater discharge into the ocean. There's increased iceberg production, and these are all potential dangers to both the local communities as well as any infrastructure that is built in the regions and so on. And so what I've summarized here is very broadly speaking the changes that are happening and the impacts. And again, the impacts are both local but also global through sea level rise. And okay, so the idea is the work that we propose to do within this action team, the sort of overarching goal is to improve our understanding and ability to predict future Arctic land ice loss, as well as its impact on local communities and other stakeholders. And of course, this is a very broad topic, and at least from my experience, we can achieve realistically progress only if we focus on several more specific items. And so what we outlined, there was a meeting in Boulder where all the action team leads were, and several program managers as well as the steering committee, and we spent a lot of time discussing what we would actually do and what to focus on. And so for the Land Ice Action Team, we essentially divided our tasks into two groups. One is the scientific focus, and the second part is stakeholder focus. And so the science focus builds on some of the activities of the GRISO U.S. Climate Working Group, which is now morphing into a broader and more international organization, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the last couple of slides. And this working group, amongst other things, organized a workshop that was open, and there was a lot of discussion, and we drafted a report at the end that was then disseminated for input from the community. The workshop was partially sponsored by NSF as well as US Cliver. There was a town hall meeting at AGU of last year, not this last AGU, where people could give more feedback and comment on the report, and it finally came out last year, and it synthesizes the scientific problem, but it also makes recommendations on how to move forward. And several recommendations were made. Amongst these, there are two that we decided that the Land Ice Action Team could actually make a contribution to. So the first one is to facilitate the establishment of a Greenland/Arctic land ice ocean atmosphere observing network. And so the idea here is that for many of the questions, scientific questions about concerning the changes of especially the marine terminating glaciers in Greenland, we lacked even a basic record of what the properties of the ocean, the atmosphere, and the glaciers had been in time in order to force models or reconstruct potential drivers. And so one of the things that we highlighted in the report is really the need to start collecting data with some continuity in some select systems. Now, a lot of this data is already effectively being collected by different networks. DMI, the Danish Meteorological Institute, has a series of meteorological stations, for example, around the coast of Greenland. There are automated weather station run by Connie Steffen and his group. There are several ocean measurements being made continuously by Danish, Greenlandic teams, and there are several ocean regions that are being monitored as part of other programs. And so the idea here is to try and facilitate interaction between these groups, highlight what new measurements are needed, and bring these communities together, hopefully leading to what will be an international network of scientists and agencies that support this observing network. And so, practically speaking, what we started doing is collecting some of this information. We're going to be producing some maps of where observing systems are already in place, and we are gearing up towards organizing a workshop that will bring some of these communities together. The second science focus that we identified is the establishment of a land ice relevant database of initially physical measurements of both ocean atmosphere and glaciology to serve the needs of the broad international community. And again, here the focus is on the science. Many data sets exist. They're just hard to get to or hard to know about. And the search group has a lot of expertise in observing networks and observing systems and in data handling. So this is something that we think we can contribute to. and one of the areas we think we'll be focusing on. So again, I'm going to stop here, and because the next step will be more on the stakeholder focus. So are there any questions on the science focus?
Fiamma, how do you see the database being established? Would it be incorporated into an existing archive facility or set up something new?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. At the beginning, what we, and we discussed this in Boulder with some of the NCAR people who were there, too, who were familiar with sort of large databases. I think this should be the focus of, I guess I'm, at the beginning, I think just highlighting what data products exist and then providing links to them would be one step forward. And I'll talk a little bit about the symmetry in a couple of slides. But this is something to be discussed. I don't think we want to duplicate efforts, and so it might just be a question of breaking down some of the barriers to finding these data or providing links. And if there is a need, I guess we could consider setting up or expanding some of the existing databases. Some of the data will have national boundaries, and so I don't anticipate that we will move, say, the DMI data, but we can work with DMI scientists to make sure that these data are more readily available. And in fact, I was in Copenhagen in the fall, and we discussed this with several of the DMI groups, as well as there's a GEOS group that maintains automated weather stations around on several glaciers around Greenland, and both these groups have are suffering from an underuse of their data, and I don't think it's because of lack of interest. It's because sometimes they're hard to get to, and they were thrilled by the idea that it would be more advertised because it would help them maintain the momentum and the funding for these data. And so, for example, there are meteorological stations in pretty isolated places in Greenland that have been maintained for decades that are running the risk of being taken away because there's no demonstrated interest, and this would be a real disaster. So these are some of the things that I think by at least linking these data together, we could help.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. So that was the science part. Now we discussed the stakeholder part too, and this is the part that I would say we've elaborated the least on, mostly because we're still in a information gathering phase. But the idea of the stakeholder focus for the land ice team is really to foster transfer of knowledge in two directions. In other words, making sure that the relevant scientific knowledge gets to the stakeholders, but also to understand what the stakeholder needs are. And so this, again, is a very broad topic. So one of the things that we thought would be useful to start with is a translation of the science. In other words, making some of the scientific results and data pertinent to land ice changes available and understandable to to a broader community. And we talked a lot about sea level rise. Sea level rise is obviously a very complex problem because it does not just involve land ice changes. Any community is interested in the regional sea level rise, which is the end product of a complex equation that involves, yes, land ice change at both hemispheres, but a lot of other processes. Some of them have to do with ice sheets, like gravitational changes. A lot of them have to do with the coupled ocean and atmosphere system. And so it's a question of narrowing down the focus and understanding the scales of variability. And so this is where I think we're still working on understanding exactly where we can make a contribution that is unique and more focused on the Arctic, and that takes into account that there are many different groups that have made sea level their focus. And so the other thing we talked about is focus stakeholder activities, and so identifying a limited number of stakeholders and really engaging with them to understand what their needs are and what the scientific community within search could contribute to. And this is, we've kind of put all of this on hold in moving forward, in part because what we're doing right now is assembling the action team. So I'm going to go to the next step. So this is a straw man sort of proposed composition of an action team, and I just wanted to put this up here to illustrate the sort of kind of diverse team that we're thinking of. And there are no names here because we're still working on the names. And so what's going to happen over the next couple months is essentially discussions to slowly populate this group. And so just going through them, myself and Ted are listed at the beginning. We expect this action team will have a sea level rise scientist, an ice sheet glacier modeler, an ocean modeler, a social scientist. We've had several names, and I've contacted several social scientists who are working in the Arctic, and we're still discussing possible names, people. A local stakeholder, this could be a business, a community in Greenland or elsewhere in the Arctic. The global stakeholder is a question mark right now. An atmospheric scientist, potentially 9 and 10 atmospheric scientists and a surface mass balance expert. The focus here is not just on the dynamic change of ice sheets, but also on the surface mass balance changes. And I also listed potentially a IARPIC representative, which would also guarantee a two-way feedback between IARPIC and the search activities. And so this is what we're in the process of doing now. Again, search is quite young, and we're just getting organized. So this is all, these are all plans. And then I'm going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about GRISO, because there is an overlap between some of the search goals and some of GRISO. And so, as Bill mentioned, I was co-chair of a U.S. Cliver working group that was focused on Greenland ice sheet ocean interactions, and it was a small working group, and it was limited at the time by definition of what a U.S. Cliver working group is to mostly U.S. scientists, and we had a finite number and so on. But it was a successful, from my perspective, working group because we did produce several syntheses, and one of the goals was really to get some of the communities, the oceanographers, the glaciologists, the atmospheric scientists to meet and interact. And it culminated in the workshop that I described earlier. For the U.S. Climate Working Group has come to an end, and in fact, U.S. Climate kindly kept it alive, at least on paper, as we transitioned. And what, after a lot of discussion with agencies such as CLIC and CLIVAR, what we decided in the end was to essentially build a science network. So it's an international group of scientists. Anybody can join. And the goal is really to facilitate interaction on the science of ice sheet change around Greenland. It doesn't have to be restricted to Greenland. Many of the processes are common to other systems in Alaska or around the Arctic, as well as the interaction with the region, the marine region around Greenland, so including eventually the marine ecosystems. And so the goals are somewhat similar to what we had as the working group, which is really make sure that these scientific communities have the possibility to meet, and some of the goals are similar to what I outlined are some of the goals of the search team. So sharing of resources, including data, information dissemination, and focusing on some of the recommendations from the report. And so there's a website, but I also want to briefly outline what GRISO is. Now we have an advisory committee, which is international and encompasses a wide range of backgrounds, from surface mass balance people to people who work on ice cores, paleo reconstructions, ice sheet modelers, and as well as Søren Ridsgaard focuses on marine ecosystems around Greenland, and glaciologists. And the idea is that this advisory committee is the go-to for contacts, for discussion of ideas. They're all quite senior and unlikely to be involved in the day-to-day activities, but they are to be seen as the point of reference. And some of them are connections with CLIC and some of the larger scale Greenland-focused ice sheet modeling projects. And then we have an acting committee, which is more junior people, again, very international, and again, a range of glaciologists, oceanographers, who are probably going to be the engine behind any GRISO activities. And so just to explain what we mean by a network, in itself, it just means monthly updates or so on meetings that might be of relevance and so on. But the activities that we foresee, some of which have started, are essentially synthesis and products, including data products, that it will be carried out or produced by working groups. And so as an example of some of the working groups that we're starting to put together, there's one that's focused on bathymetry, one that is focused on a Greenland observing network, and one that's focused on surface mass balance, with leads from the sort of GRISO acting committee, but open membership. And one example, I'm going to talk about bathymetry because it's one that we've made a little bit of progress on. There are efforts by some of the leaders of IPCAO, for example, Martin Jacobsen, to pull together a lot of the bathymetry around the shelves in Greenland, but there's still a lot of data, many of which have been collected by PIs such as myself or other individual PIs that haven't made it to any of these databases, and these databases, like IPCOW, by the time it comes out, it has gridded data, which is not very useful if you want to model the circulation of water flowing onto a shelf and inside a glacial fjord. And so we had a meeting at AGU with Martin Jacobsen to try and understand how we can help in produce some bathymetric products that will be useful in particular to modelers. And so I think we'll see some progress on it at the beginning. Some of it will just ensuring that the data goes to some of these projects, especially IPCOW, that will be instrumental in putting and quality controlling the data together. But then we're also going to work with IPCOW to produce regional maps at higher resolution that can be used. And so these are some of the ideas. As part of the GRISO activities, there'll be focus workshops and probably an annual meeting. Now, you're all thinking, well, this sounds really good. Where's the funding going to come from? And that's a good question. The way we envision it, GRISO is not something that will do the science in terms of we don't expect it to be able to secure funding for targeted scientific activities, but we are hopeful that we will be able to provide through GRISO funding for workshops or small meetings or teleconferences and so on. And so we've talked with CLIC, and there's a CLIC steering group meeting in February that I'll be attending. With CLIVR, and we think some of these programs, including US CLIVR, and maybe some federal agencies, will be interested in funding specific activities with specific products in mind. So this was the choice for not putting GRISO under any specific agency or program, is to give it the maximum flexibility in terms of moving and being able to say, I'd like to do this, can I organize a workshop, and so on. And so I wanted to discuss GRISO because there's an overlap with the Search Land Ice team. This is true also of the Permafrost Action team. There's an equivalent Permafrost Carbon Network led by the two co-leads of the Search Permafrost team. And so I think the overlap is intentional in the sense that I think the action team co-leads were selected because we were already active in these area, and I don't think it's I think it's a productive overlap. And so in something, Search and GRISO are going to be working together. In some other things, Search Land Ice Action Team will be doing its own thing, and GRISO is more Greenland focused. So that's it. I think I've said everything I have to say, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And again, hear thoughts, because this is all in progress and really open to suggestions on how to do this better.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hi, Bill, Fiamma, it's Martin. If I could maybe just kick things off. Fiamma, you and I, and probably others on this call, were at the Search Town Hall meeting at AGU just a few weeks ago. And Karen Ashton was there, and she raised a concern about the three search action teams being very physical science oriented. And I had my own particular response to that. But I wonder, from the point of view of the Search Land Ice Action Team, have you thought of the biological and ecosystem consequences of retreat of the ice and the impacts of that, particularly, say, at the local level on Greenland communities and even Canadian Arctic communities, and whether at some point in the future you might add that component to the team's activities.
Yeah, I think that was a very good comment from Karen, and it's something that I definitely am aware of. So one of the reasons why we're holding back a little bit on quickly assembling an action team is to essentially identify some of the local stakeholders' needs that we might target, and so we are hopeful that some of the contacts, whether it's anthropologists working around the Arctic or maybe some marine ecosystem people, will provide some, some specific ideas of what we could do. And so I think that's a good point, and I think it's something that we're open to and aware of.
Okay, thanks.
I think there's a bit of a danger that, anytime something like this gets put together, there are always people that say, but my thing's not there. And Bill put this very well, and I will probably completely misquote him, in the context of another effort that sort of started to get underway a couple of years ago and then tried to become more inclusive, and now has become so big that it's lost its focus and has lost the interest of some of the people who initiated it, because it's grown away from the original motivating factors. So I think that's just always it's a balance that needs to be struck. I think there's some good focus here that you don't want to lose in the process of becoming potentially more inclusive.
This is Bob. I'll just toss in a comment here, because I wasn't at the town hall meeting, so I didn't hear exactly what was said, but I know the issue of the importance of what I'll call social science issues has always been, we're very aware of that on the steering committee. And one of our roles, I think, will be to ensure that it's not just physical science that's being done through search, that we want to make sure that social scientists and those concerned with the human dimension issues find each of these action teams receptive to those issues that they feel are paramount. So that's really at the heart and soul of research. So I think the proof will be in the performance of these action teams, but I think everybody is very much geared to make sure that it's not just sort of your business as usual physical science.
So Fiamma, the website that the GRISO team has, because it's an international association of scientists, you have insights into what's going on in other countries that might be more challenging for us in the federal government to achieve. Are you keeping that website up to date with opportunities and ongoing activities, meetings, field campaigns, things of that nature that might be of interest to the broader community?
That's definitely the plan. The website was just launched in December, and I should emphasize that GRISO per se has no funding as so it goes, but we are working to sort of collate some of this information, and the mode of operation that we think will be the most useful is to send out a digest, probably a monthly digest. But yes, we've definitely highlighted some of the meetings that are going to be happening, and some of the opportunities. So that's the idea. Similarly, we hope to, the working groups are just spinning up, and we're trying to keep some of the activities really focused, because I think this is where we see making the most progress. So some of the maps that we're working on now are just going to highlight where measurements exist, and then just provide links or indications of where different groups are working, and it'll just be a really basic level of information, but one that is really absent now. We've only had a couple of meetings or conference calls with the GRISO group, so we're really getting going. And again, we're open to suggestions, both in terms of what to do and what funding might be available for some of the organizational structure. Some of the search activities, there's some funding for workshops and so on, and so again, there's common goals here, and a two-way exchange between GRISO and search, and I think this is great and to be capitalized on.
Okay, thanks.
Fiamma, it's Martin again. As you know, the IARPIC collaboration teams are open, wide open, and that includes overseas participation. Obviously, for the search land ice team, there are strong and necessary connections to international researchers and research projects, and you're working on those connections. But in terms of your action team, do you envisage that there will be any overseas members, or will it be entirely, apart from, say, possible Greenland community or business representatives, is it likely to be entirely U.S., or are you aiming to have other international representatives in some of those particular topics that you listed there?
Yeah. That's a good point, and one that, Martin knows I've raised it several times. I am hoping the search team will be, not significantly, I don't know what the numbers mean, but international in that I think we want to make sure that it does the best job with some of the best people we can bring in, and I think it should be international. Ultimately, many of the Arctic changes are happening outside of, they're not necessarily in U.S. territory, and I think if search wants to make a contribution here, we should be open to international participation. And so some are obvious. I don't think we should be, or even thinking of doing Greenland without Danish or Greenlandic participation, but we're also looking at some of the other Arctic border nations, because we think we can work better. For example, if we can include a Canadian representative and maybe some other Northern European, I think it'll benefit search, but mostly it'll benefit the goals that we've outlined.
Okay, thanks.
Fiamma, this is Sarah. On the GRISO activity, have you had any interaction with the IAS Cryosphere Working Group, Martin Sharp in Canada?
Not yet. I am aware of some of the things they're doing. but that's one avenue we haven't expanded into yet. But that's not to say that it won't happen. Do you have something specific in mind?
So they have funding of about $20K per year to facilitate the types of things that you're talking about in terms of workshops and so forth. And so you can put a proposal forward to them through any of their national representatives for an activity that as long as it's international, then it can be considered by them. And so the U.S. representatives to that group are Walt Meyer at NASA and Elizabeth Hunke at Los Alamos. So if you get in contact with them, they can put the proposal forward on your behalf if it's something that they're convinced would be worthwhile.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions or comments? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Fiamma. That was very informative.